the Senate torture report, the Cromnibus, and the UVA rape story. I'm Denisha Richard, and this is The Square Circle. Hello and welcome to The Square Circle. I'm your host, Denisha Richard. Joining us today are Gregory Clay of gdclay.com, Al Matei of topofthecircle.com, and of course Nick Morphus of Liberty Minds. Welcome everyone.
Thank you for having us.
Hello.
The big story this week was the Senate Intelligence Committee's report on the CIA tortures program during the Bush administration. The report presented damning evidence of horrific techniques that CIA agents used against terrorist captives. But CIA Director John Brennan publicly defended the program on Thursday. Others have accused the Senate's committee staff of misleading the public. Gregory Clay. Leaving aside the question of whether the report is truthful, was the CIA justified in using these interrogation techniques?
Well, initially, regarding that question, I was equivocating. And I don't like that. I'm not an equivocating kind of dude. That bothered me. Until I heard one of the survivors, victim survivors from September 11th being interviewed. And she lost her husband at the World Trade Center that day. And at the time, her child was 4 days old. So the child was growing up without a father. And I agree with something that she said. Because of that day, she didn't care about waterboarding or any other, whether you want to call it EIT or torture or whatever. Like she said, it doesn't faze me. I agree with her. It doesn't faze me either. I mean, what was it? 3,000 people died that day. And I am not equivocating anymore.
I lost a classmate from my graduating class at Harvard in the September 11th, 2001 attacks. But I have a much different point of view on this. Was the CIA justified in using these techniques? I say no. I think the reason is couched in two words that came into the media this week: moral authority. And regrettably, nobody's actually gone through and actually tried to suss out what they think moral authority is. Moral authority to me is the willingness for the government or agents of the government acting in the name of the people of the country that they represent. Will they uphold the very things that are that make the country what it is? You can transplant the moral authority in Canada, for example. They stand for peace, order, and good government. In the United States, it's life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness, and the 27 amendments to the Constitution. And if we're not able to say that the people who are under, are the war criminals that we may find, if they don't have the right to attorneys, if they don't have the rights that American citizens have, we definitely have lost our moral authority.
Mr. Morphus, what's your take?
Well, I've actually been covering this story for the good majority of the week, keeping me up till 3 a.m, but I do not believe that these techniques were justified at all. As sad as 9/11 was, and it truly was a horrible, horrible tragedy, we have also many instances of our military where we have thousands upon thousands of innocent people who are killed by drone bombings, who are killed by military operations. And not only that, the amount of people that were tortured by the CIA and CIA black sites of Afghanistan and Iraq and Guantanamo Bay, 26 in the report were found to have not had any ties to terrorism or had no evidence to actually hold them. My issue is that our country is supposed to espouse the morals of inalienable rights. Inalienable rights does not mean American citizens or people that we deem worthy of granting these rights. These rights, inalienable rights, means these rights are endowed by your creator or by nature to every single person, every single human being on earth. And if we can't even stand for that for other people abroad, then how can we even say that we should stand for it here? You know, we have murderers and rapists and people like that in our country who kill people. I mean, totally morally depraved people. And we give them trials, we give them justice. And by allowing the CIA, whether the report is true or not, I believe it is true. And to think that doing things like this, like torture, which it wasn't just waterboarding, it was the forcing prisoners to stand on broken legs and feet.
Right.
This was rectal feeding, which was not used to feed people so much as it was to humiliate them. You will not find a medical practitioner who will tell you that rectal feeding is there to actually help the person.
And sleep deprivation and chains.
Sleep deprivation is going on for,
Uh-huh.
it doesn't sound so bad on paper, but, you know, someone who supports torture, I fully would like to see them see how they would feel about it after they've been waterboarded, after they've been put through sleep deprivation, and all these things that these people were put through, and then tell me it's not torture and that it's not inhumane. It completely
it
is.
sounds like, okay, now there's talk that the United Nations, you know, is condemning the United States, you know, at the report, blah, 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 and is considering, or at least talking about, or discussing bringing war crime charges against U.S. officials. Are you for that? I mean, do you want to see U.S. officials?
I don't want to see the UN do it. I don't want to see the UN do it.
You know, on trial in Europe at at The Hague or somewhere. You know, and being tried for war crimes. You know,
I don't want the
because
I don't want
are
the
very
UN
upset about this.
Well, of course they're really upset.
Yeah.
The UN, the funny thing about the UN is, and a lot of the nations in there, I am willing to I'm willing to bet my bottom dollar on it that their nations have done similar things as well,
worse,
and haven't been caught yet.
Right.
However,
so who are they to say the United States can't do what it has to do?
I agree, but I believe as a country, as ourselves, if we are going to stand on a moral authority and we are going to preach about human rights and we're going to preach about inalienable rights and freedom and all these different things that we are supposed to stand for, and then do something like this and not hold anyone accountable is inexcusable.
I did want to remind our audience that you can submit your questions to our guests through the website, www.publicsquare.net, and we'll answer as many as we can live on air towards the end of the show. So as we move on, Congress this week faced a deadline for keeping the federal government operating, at least over the holidays. It passed an omnibus containing resolution, or Cromnibus, late on Thursday. But the process was messy, with many members' pet provisions finding their way into the bill, and hardlines on both sides fighting to keep the bill from passing. Mr. Morphus, how did Congress' most basic responsibility become such an ordeal, and who was most at fault?
You know, when we bring up what government's most basic responsibility is, when our country was founded, it was founded on the basic principle of life, liberty, and property, to protect contracts, to defend our borders, to provide a national defense, things like that. What our country has essentially become, our government, its basic responsibilities have become so numerous and so massive that we cannot expect to pass even a reasonable spending budget. I mean, a spending plan in this country revolves around so many different things. And now that you have issues of immigration, you have, the executive orders of immigration. You have issues of, well, for instance, the GOP wants to defund $300 million out of the IRS. I'm all for that. But then you have so many other issues coming into this. We can't possibly decide to we can't actually come around to pass a reasonable spending bill because our view of what the government is doing is too wide and expansive. There is no middle ground really on this anymore. Now, when you have issues of politicians like Elizabeth Warren and those on the right who are hardlining against this bill because there are things in this bill that are bad. You have crony deals in this bill that benefit certain people and punish others.
I find it to be real negotiation and compromise. You know, I mean, what is negotiation? You know, you give up something to get something. You know, and like President Obama said Friday morning, there are several things in the bill he doesn't like. But he was honest for once. He also said there are several things in the bill that the Republicans don't like, which is true. You know, the Democrats apparently said, okay, you can relax some of the restrictions on banking. You know, Republicans wanted that, right? Okay, and the Republicans gave up, you know, the money issue on immigration, you know, which is what the Democrats wanted, right? You know, to allow some funding for, you know, President Obama's immigration plan, you know, but you know, each side gained something, each side lost something, and that's what negotiation and compromise is all about.
I call this, instead of the Cromnibus, I call this the Cromnibus bill. There's just so much cronyism that went into this, and so many different sides. There are a few things that are outrageous about this bill. Elizabeth Warren pointed out the size, 1,600 pages. It was almost as though it was designed to be obtuse enough so that the average American wouldn't care what's in the bill.
Well,
And there's so much
government works.
Right.
It shouldn't.
There's a lot of things the government shouldn't be doing.
Right, exactly. For once, I agree with Morpus. Once, I agree with you, Morpus.
The thing is,
for once,
what you're seeing now is you're seeing a pattern. Instead of there being negotiations over 11 different appropriations, you're seeing enormous omnibuses, or however one is, omnibus bills that get voted on at the last minute, get pushed through, and then all of a sudden, people realize, either there's popular uprising in either the media or in popular culture.
My biggest issues with this bill also stem from the fact that it is over a $1 trillion spending bill. We just passed the $18 trillion mark not too long ago. And the fact is, this country is broke. The Republicans and the Democrats are not having a hard time agreeing. The problem is that there's too much bipartisanship in the wrong places.
And finally, we do have more developments in the saga of the rape case at the University of Virginia. And after Rolling Stone pulled its support for the original article it published on the case, the Washington Post did its own investigation of the incident. The Post interviewed friends of the alleged victim and checked out some of her claims. Their reporting revealed that her account is even more doubtful than previously thought. Mr. Almatay, is this case an anomaly, or do you think many claims of sexual assault are exaggerated?
Oh my goodness. It's a troubling question, but let's try and pull up a couple of these things apart. If anything, sexual assault on college campuses is underreported by far. The problem is you have a situation on campus that has been festering. I shouldn't say festering, but it's been in place since the late 1960s. Many of you, and probably a lot of our listeners, may not remember the term in loco parentis. Part of what was occurring at college campuses in the 1960s was allowing campuses to rule themselves, almost be an entity unto themselves, in lieu of parents, in loco parentis. Law enforcement largely has a hands-off relationship with most campuses, at least until the last few years when there's been more requests for police officers, well, not just police officers, but for federal reporting of crimes on campus. What you're seeing, I think, finally is hopefully the reporting in this story will try and get more women to not only report sexual assault, but also to, just sort of, drop this sort of ivory tower, let's protect the students from the police, when it's like, wait a second, we gotta sometimes protect the students from each other.
This UVA issue stems from, as a writer myself, I believe, from a complete lack of journalistic integrity. This story was irresponsibly written because it did not, the writer herself did not actually follow up with those who were accused of actually committing this crime.
Right.
Interesting.
So the writer failed in her duty as a journalist. Her duty is to inform the public of what is going on, and she failed in her duty to do that by not following up all leads and not tying up all loose ends. Now it was claimed in the story that the reason they did not do that was on the request of the victim. The problem with that is if our legal system ran that way and we just did it by whatever the victim says or whatever an accusee says,
Right.
we'd have people being locked up left and right,
Right.
like the Salem witch hunts.
Right.
Now, when it comes to rape in general, which of course rape is an absolutely abhorrent crime, what we should be doing is, rather than leaving this to the universities to actually deal with, which I think is a terrible idea. Like, you have issues in California where they're passing regulations to force on schools where they have to enforce rape in a certain way. This is not the job of a school to enforce laws that are already enacted by a government. What should be happening is schools should be completely devoid of this whatsoever. This is a legal issue. This is not the school's going to slap someone on the wrist for something bad. If it's something breaking school code, of course, yeah, just leave that to the school, something petty. But something like murder or rape or things like this, these are things that should be dealt with that law enforcement should be dealing with,
Right.
Yeah.
not leaving it up to the universities. The problem that I have with stories like this, the UVA case, is that it creates an atmosphere where either people who have preconceived notions where they believe, oh, well, now everyone's crying wolf.
Right.
Or you have issues of where people are convicted and they say, well, every single rape case is true. I mean, you had issues of, I can't remember her name, but the writer for Jezebel, criticizing anyone who actually decided to abide by journalistic integrity and look into the story and find these discrepancies in the story. And she was calling people idiotic and stupid and misogynist and things like that. And this type of language is not helpful in cases like this. What we should be doing is looking at each case individually, looking at all the facts and details, not publishing things before we check all of our sources, and not relying on just one source to be able to develop our entire basis on what we're going to accuse someone of. I mean, the story was absolutely abhorrent. A girl being raped and beaten for, I believe it was hours, this happening, and her friends telling her, not to report this so they can't go to, because if they do, they won't go to parties anymore. When it turns out, when they decided to follow, the Washington Post did the Rolling Stones job and looked into the story, and we found out that it was not the friends who told this. According to the friends, it was her who didn't want to tell the authorities for that reason. I mean, this is the whole essence of what our culture has become. We've become knee-jerk reactionists. Any story that happens, as soon as someone is accused of something, we jump in and, okay, they must be.
Right.
They must be, wrong.
Automatically.
Because this one story said so, and that's it.
Don't check out the other side. Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
when it comes to this case, I believe this whole case came about as a complete failure of journalistic
Right.
integrity.
Right. Yeah.
And it led to people being hurt because of it.
Yeah, yeah, you're right. Yeah, you're right. And going back to what the country is becoming, to me, the country is becoming a country of narratives. Because now we see that in every major story. You notice that? Okay, go back to Ferguson, the first narrative. Oh, the dude had his hands up. Oh, okay. Well, maybe now we know. Well, maybe did, maybe didn't. Okay, and you look at this case, the narrative was, the fraternity, did horrible things, to this woman, and there was talk that there was a guy basically who was kind of acting like as a movie director. He was telling this guy to do this to her, and this other guy over here to do that to her.
And that there was a cover-up.
Yeah, a cover-up. Yeah, he was like a maestro, a conductor and stuff. That's how crazy it was. But, like Morpheus just said, you didn't get the other side. She didn't talk to the supposed fraternity guys who were supposedly involved and all that. But you still maintain, that narrative, and the downside of this is women in the future. Where do women go from this? So that's the thing about this. I mean, forget about what's an author bad or good or ethical or unethical, whatever. Now, I mean, are women, going to, look at this and say, oh man, if I come forward,
Exactly.
people are going to destroy me. I could be, not only Jackie, but I could be worse than Jackie. And I'm telling, I know what happened, but I'm fearful of going forward because I could be destroyed, in terms of character assassination,
Exactly.
et cetera, et cetera. And women who, are really sexually assaulted, what's the mindset going to be? So that's the key now. What is the mindset going to be? Because there's been talk for years that colleges, especially major colleges, have been major grounds for major sexual assaults. But because it's on colleges, et cetera, like Morph was saying earlier, it's viewed in a college environment, as opposed to a law enforcement environment. Let the colleges take care of it. I mean, you could bring up the whole, fox got in the chicken coop, analogy on this, and that's the bigger issue in this situation to me. What happens to women going forward, especially on college campuses, and also you have to bring athletics into this too. The next time a female student, is attacked by a star athlete, that is going to be very interesting because she may have hell to pay.
Let's go ahead and talk about some of the questions that some of our viewers have. A little bit earlier into the show today, we did talk about terrorism and how it affects people. One question that I have from Manuel Ramirez is, do you think the U.S. torturing people contributes to the spread of terrorism?
Certainly. Just like any other action that we have, every single action that we have overseas has a reaction. It's common sense. I mean, the way people over there view us is based on what they can see with their own two eyes. It's not the United States of America over there. They don't have massive media. They don't have all these different outlets. What they know is what they see. And when you have things like this happen, like torture or drones or anything that happens over there where innocent people are killed, it inspires them, of course, to hate the people who are doing it. And I'm not this is always called America blaming. I'm blaming our government. They're the ones making these decisions to do this. And they're bringing problems onto us and then blaming other people for it. I would love to see how this country would react if China or North Korea or Russia or Iran or Iraq or any other country treated us the way we treat the Middle East, and the way that Europe and America and the UN has treated the Middle East for this past century. I would love to see how we would react. We would not stand for it.
Can I just say this one thing? Something tells me that ISIS would be beheading Americans, torture or no torture. That's all I have to say.
Well, would ISIS even be in Iraq or have the power that they have had we not gone into Iraq in the first place? Would ISIS even exist? Would they have the manpower to create the hatred and materialize that into what ISIS is today if we were over there?
Well, so you're saying that ISIS is only a product of U.S. intervention?
I am saying
that's basically what you're saying.
Yes, I am.
So if the United States is not involved in the Middle East, there is no ISIS. Are you sure you can make that assumption?
I certainly can.
Well,
it's basically a syllogism.
There's nothing to say that an ISIS-esque organization would have started had George W. Bush decided to simply allow Kuwait to have been swallowed up by Iraq in 2000 and in the 90s. In the first place. if there had been no engagement.
The next question is from Rose Sherman. Are there any circumstances under which torture is acceptable?
No.
Yes.
No.
Yes.
Well, different answers here.
Yes. Yes.
I would have to say not, because if we aren't going to obey the law that are set, how can we possibly expect our enemies to do the same? If people in other countries are treating our soldiers this way, we condemn it, and rightfully so, because it is a crime, it is inhumane, it is terrible. However, how can we possibly even stand on that box and condemn them for doing that when we do the same thing? And it's just, it becomes an issue of who's more right than the other. And it becomes an issue of, well, no one's more right.
Yeah, but sometimes the ends justify the means. It's one of those ends means things.
That's a scary road to go down.
Sometimes. I'm not saying all the time, but sometimes. If somebody has some information, you know they have the information, and you have to get that information to save the lives of 10 million people, hey, you do what you have to do.
But will they tell you that?
Do what you have to do.
Will they tell you the right information?
Okay, yeah, I know what you're
People
saying.
will tell you
I know what you're
anything
saying.
to get
It
to
could be
stop.
phony just so the person can get off the hook. You know, it could be.
Very true.
You know, I know where you're coming from. John McCain made that argument the other day. Remember that?
And he is a
And he was
a
tortured
victim-
himself.
He was a victim
in
of
Vietnam.
torture.
Yeah, you know. But sometimes, to me, you do it as a piece of the puzzle. You know, I'm not saying that it's the entire scope. You know, that you depend on that for the entire scope. But when you're trying to put pieces of the puzzle together, then I think torture has to be part of that puzzle. You know, if you can get, several detainees or whatever, and you're getting the same information or something like that, then you may be on to something, and at least you have a direction to go. I mean, but to sit here and say, oh, you can never use torture, and especially in these times, personally, I can't say that. I can't say you can never use torture.
Mr. Matei, what do you think?
Absolutely 100% no. When you think about torture and its lack of effectiveness, it's been documented in the Senate report this week. The most information that was gleaned from the average prisoner came before there was even the thought of enhanced interrogation techniques. And
Like the location of Osama bin Laden was found with conventional interrogation methods.
Okay, now it's time for the most underreported story of the week. And we can have our free will here. Who would like to start?
I'll start.
Great, Mr. Clay.
All right. Okay, here we go. Most people, I figure by now, have heard of the Jessica Chambers situation in Mississippi. The woman who was burned alive on the side of the road in Cortland, Mississippi.
Oh yeah, I saw that.
Now, the media have been covering it. When I say the media, I'm of course usually talking about cable, CNN, MSNBC, and Fox. But one thing that has been underreported, and it really bothers me about this whole case, is simply this. There's a movement going on in Mississippi. Okay? And when we hear movements this day and time, of course, it's all about Ferguson and Staten Island and Eric Garner and this and police brutality and all that. Now, one of the things I've noticed is people in Mississippi are starting their own movement, if you want to call it that. And it's being called Justice for Jessica. And they've taken to their own meme, so to speak. I talked about narratives earlier. They got their own narrative going on. What is it called? White Lives Matter. Okay? We've all heard past 4 months since August about Black Lives Matter.
Why can't just lives matter?
Now it's White Lives Matter. And because this case, if it goes the way a lot of the people in Mississippi, the locals I'm talking about, this is a small town, remember, it's like 500 people. Something tells me that those locals know what's happening. Because I noticed the police, when I watched their news conferences, the police, of course, are only going to say so much. But the locals down there, their belief is that it's a racial case. And the belief is that she was killed by a former boyfriend. Jessica Chambers is white. Some people down there are saying that her former boyfriend was black, and she tried to get out of a bad relationship. He was physically and verbally abusive to her, but he wouldn't let go. It sounds like it could be. None of this is confirmed, but it sounds like it may turn out to be another O.J. Simpson case with less known people, not celebrities.
A week ago, a grand jury in Maryland declined to return a conviction on a police brutality case. As the narrative goes, there's that word again, in January of 2013, Robert Ethan Saylor was watching the movie Oh Dark 30 in Frederick, Maryland with his caretaker. And the caretaker at the end of the movie took Robert out of the theater, and he was agitated because the movie was over. Again, he was seen to saying, Robert Saylor has Down syndrome, and the caretaker was having a little bit of difficulty trying to settle him down. So the caretaker, I think it was a she, went to go and get the car and let him calm down on the sidewalk, and not to try and get him into the car, because Robert Saylor was a little bit over 250 pounds and had emotional issues, and it was sometimes very difficult to control. While the caretaker went to the car, he went back into the movie theater. The police were called. 3 police officers handcuffed him and put his head down and supposedly stepped on the back of his throat. And by the time the paramedics arrived, he was dead.
Oh my.
So, what can we say except, hopefully we can all agree upon the fact that all lives matter.
Thank you.
Great. Mr. Morphus, what's your story?
Well, I decided I'm gonna kind of cheer up what we've been talking about this whole time. Everything's been kind of negative.
A light note in the house.
We're
Great.
gonna have like a light
A
story.
light. Perfect.
Well, I covered a story today. It was really interesting. At the Boston State House, a time capsule was found in one of the columns of the building. It was discovered by those who were dealing with workers who were dealing with a water leak. They found this time capsule that was buried by Samuel Adams and Paul Revere when Samuel Adams was governor of Massachusetts. It was really interesting because they found, apparently this time capsule had been discovered in 1855 as well, where some coins and things like that were added into the
Foundation?
Into some of the foundation with the box as well. The plaster is in still really good condition, so they're hoping that means that the contents inside are still in good condition as well, and they believe that there will be papers, plates, coins, things of that nature from that time. And as a lover of history as I am, I found that story to be so interesting, and I'm dying to know what's in that box. Isn't
that related to Paul Revere in some way?
Yeah, it was Samuel Adams and Paul Revere who buried that.
So if it's Samuel Adams, does that mean there's going to be a beer recipe?
Oh, I hope so. Really good summer ale, just the perfect summer ale. It's been hidden away this long.
The older the better. Well, you all had amazing opinions today and also amazing stories. I do thank you, gentlemen, for joining us today.
Thank you.
And for the
inviting us.
viewers, thank you for watching The Square Circle. That is all for this week. Thank you for watching.